Hi, welcome to my new video. In this video I'm talking about a Linux distro I've been using for the last months and which I really prefer over all the distros I've used previously, which is NixOS. What is NixOS and what things do I have to say that really make NixOS completely unique towards Debian, Ubuntu, Arch and Fedora based Linux distros? I mean, Ubuntu is Debian based, okay, but... So, what's my experience with it? What advantages NixOS has over other Linux distros? Why it might even be, let's just say under exclamation mark, easier to work with than other Linux distros, and even provide you more freedom and even more modularity for advanced users. That's the content of this video. Let's go. Now, first of all, what I really want to mention is, who am I in regards of what kind of Linux user am I? Or, to formulate myself better, what kind of things do I need to do with the distro and the computer? First of all, doing university, school stuff. I mean, yeah, that's really, any distro can do that without any issues, but the real interesting parts are, first of all, gaming, music production. These are really some fundamental things I really want to utilize. And NixOS has worked flawlessly without any issues. And what I can say is that NixOS is the Linux distro I'm currently the most comfortable I've ever been with any Linux distro ever. So even more comfortable than Fedora, Debian and Arch-based systems. And in this video, I really want to point out some fundamental advantages, in my perspective, that NixOS has over other Linux distros. Yeah. Now, what is NixOS? Now, what is NixOS and what makes NixOS so special compared to other distros? Because now, I'm gonna show you later on the full installation or the simplified installation phase from start to finish, how to install packages, etc. But right now, I just wanna give you a rough introduction. Because right now, for example, here I have installed the fast fetch command, then, working with hdrop, the typical terminal commands without any issues. Now, for example, what I wanna mention, that when you are trying to install some packages and tools that, usually on Debian-based systems, you type in sudo install VLC, for example. On Fedora-based systems, you do the same thing with DNF. And on Arch-based systems, you just type in sudo pacman -s VLC. And what you have seen right now, this is a process where you basically go into your terminal and make an indirect command. You tell your computer to do something, but you do not specify a state in which it has been installed. That sounds weird now at first, but what I mean can be explained really easily. Because, for example, if I try to install fast fetch and hdrop or VLC, on NixOS, I don't do any of these commands. What I do is sudo nano. Nano is the text editor. Sudo means to run a command as administrator. /etc/nixos/configuration.nix. What I want to mention that NixOS is not really a beginner distro, obviously, but again, as someone who has been using multiple different kinds of Linux distros, Arch, Fedora based, etc. I've never been happier with a Linux distro than I'm currently now with NixOS. And I can say is that working with NixOS is easier than working with Arch Linux. And when you're not scared of working inside a text editor, then NixOS is actually maybe not Linux Mint level of easy, but definitely classic Debian, for example, or typical distros where the installation process is rather straightforward. So sudo nano etc configuration.nix. Again, I will show you later on how to configure everything and install everything. But now I'll just give you a showcase of my already configured system. I tap enter, password, and yeah. For example, here on top you have a documentation, edit configuration file to define what should be installed on the system. Basically, that means that everything in this configuration file, in addition of the other files here, I will explain in a second now, is being installed on the system. Basically, that means if a certain program does not exist here in this text file, basically, because .nix is more or less a text file, it is a text file, then does not exist otherwise. So here I have some stuff configured. Again, in this video I'm not going to delve into that. I will show you a simplified version later on. But for example, htop or VLC, for example, I went to environment system packages, and here I have added fast fetch, for example, btop, htop, parted, etc. VLC again. And what I've done then, I've run sudo NixOS rebuild switch and then press enter. Basically what that means, that if you make a change to this configuration file, it is going to be applied. So basically instead of typing sudo dnf install VLC, you add this, for example, to environment system packages, VLC here, save it, and then later on rebuild your system. Then after the rebuild has been finished, VLC is being installed. I mean, I've also saw the Flatpak version, but that's a different topic now. Now, what I want to clarify beforehand, that, for example, I think you should know for later on, that what this command means. Sudo NixOS rebuild switch. That means sudo run as administrator, NixOS rebuild. That means that your system should again read the configuration file, and that means to apply these changes immediately. But if you are running on GPU drivers, for example, that sudo NixOS rebuild boot, that means that you apply this, press enter, and you're done sudo reboot, and during the reboot process, only then the NixOS rebuild changes will be applied. Again, I've bombarded you with information, but I will show you the installation process is rather straightforward. And I'm just going to start with the package and service handling. So with service, I mean background programs handling. Now on most Linux distros, so I call it the distro trinity, basically, Debian, Fedora, Arch, and their derivatives that make up, 98% of all Linux distros. They work on the same principle, because you go on the terminal and type in sudo pacman -s or sudo dnf install or sudo apt install VLC, for example, to install a package. So what that means is that you give this terminal or your operating system through the terminal a command and say, okay, you are going to do something. Now, for example, if later on you install other programs and they start overriding or adding extensions to the program, you cannot really control that. And also, for example, in terms of modifying a system, for example, enabling real-time privileges, because, for example, you have done this in the past, and now you want to find out, okay, where is this file where I've modified my system? Because on most distros, all configuration files are spread out, and even the package installation. NixOS is fundamentally different, because on NixOS you have a configuration file. Inside the configuration file, you type in all the packages and tools you want to install, the configuration changes you want to have enabled, etc. Which basically means multiple things. Because primarily what that means, that only those things that are written on the configuration file are happening on your system. Nothing else, nothing on the shadow can modify your system. because it needs to modify the configuration file to modify your system, which gains you an iron grip control over your system, etc. Now, the part I really like the most is, for example, Nix packages and the amount of packages it has over the AUR, for example, or any other Linux distro packages. Because of all Linux distros, NixOS, or Nix packages to be more precise, has the most amount of packages of all Linux distros. Now, why is that the case and why is that so special? Because first of all, it means that it's really easy to do, in comparison to other Linux distros, to develop packages for NixOS. Now, why is that the case? Because NixOS has a quirk or a characteristic which, Debian, Fedora and Arch-based systems do not possess. Now, what might that be? NixOS allows you to install multiple versions of dependencies simultaneously. So I think I will make a video about it in the future because I want to keep it rather short, and if I entangle myself in every single explanation, this video might have no end. No, but seriously, it bypasses some fundamental Linux problems, specifically Arch Linux problems, on a fundamental operating system level. Because, for example, on Arch Linux, let's make a comparison. If you have two programs, one program requires you install two different programs, for example. One is updated more frequently, the other not so often. And both require the same dependency. I'm just going to call this program dependency because, whatever. Now, currently, for example, they both require dependency version 1. Now, in Arch Linux, for example, it could happen that, for example, a certain program gets updated. It requires a dependency of version 2. Now, Arch Linux in the repositories, okay, a new version of the dependency is available. Let's install it. So this one program that requires dependency version 2 has access to it. It works flawlessly. But the other program that is not so well maintained, for example, still requires dependency version 1. But this has been overwritten by version 2 of the dependency. And now you might have the typical Arch Linux. The program starts doing funny stuff. On NixOS, for example, it behaves differently, because when you rebuild your system, I will show you what I mean with that from the configuration file, nothing is overwritten, everything has been newly generated. And additionally, because if you install the program 1, all the dependencies are installed for you. So dependencies are not really a topic on NixOS. The operating system does that for you. So program this one program has dependency 1, and it still needs it without any issues. The other program has dependency version 2. Both versions of the dependency in NixOS are functioning in parallel, only interacting with the said program that needs it, and voila, you have a functioning system. Now, for example, if another program is installed that also requires dependency version 2, the dependency is not installed additionally, it just links to it, so it does not consume your data space, obviously. But this is one of many great advantages I really, really like about NixOS. Now, what is NixOS? Is NixOS a stable release like Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, or is it rolling release like Void Linux, Arch Linux? Well, NixOS is either a stable release distro, like I said, Debian, Fedora, or a rolling release distro like Arch, Void Linux, or it is a fusion of these two. And again, this is a characteristic which makes NixOS completely unique. Now, I've got to say, I've never used the functionality, I'm not planning to, I'm just saying that you can. I mean, there's the topic of Nix channels or replacing them with flakes, but that's a different topic, I'll cover in a different video. I'm just trying to keep things rather simple here. But another thing is, again, where when you update your system, a new generation of your entire system is being generated. The old one is not overwritten. Now you can run a trash collect program that deletes unneeded files. So if a program is just, a dependency is being installed, but no program is needing it, then of course it will be uninstalled. Now, another thing I really want to cover, that is, for example, I've been doing music production, etc. previously on EndeavorsOS, an Arch Linux based system. And yeah, I liked Arch Linux good and fine, but there was one problem. It was Arch Linux. Okay, no. Since it has a rolling release nature, things can get quite buggy at times. So how do I bypass this issue? I've installed on Arch Linux Timeshift. Timeshift, a system backup tool, to roll back your system. Now, I've also had the issue that Timeshift itself was being buggy all the time, so yeah, I needed to reinstall my system. It was not fun at all. On NixOS, things are completely different. And you can remember, I have said that when you update your system, a new generation of the system is being generated, but not the old one automatically overwritten. So what that means, that NixOS has a Timeshift system rollback functionality ingrained into the fundamentals of the operating system itself, installed functioning from the get-go. It's not a program that you need to install additionally, it is a functionality of the OS itself. Now, to end this short tutorial and this short showcase, what is NixOS for? NixOS can be used as a server. NixOS can be used for programming. It can be used for gaming, for game development, for music production, whatever you ever want. Okay? It is an extremely flexible Linux distro. It can be used as stable release, rolling release, or hybrid release. Let's just make this term up. So it can be anything you would want to. And again, in terms of package handling, now not in terms of package stability, so that if a program itself is buggy, I'm not talking about that, but program interactivity between programs, dependencies and other programs. NixOS, unstable for example, works way more reliable, for example, in that regard, than Debian stable would be, in terms of how programs interact with each other. Now, that's not to say that if you're working with the rolling release version, that things are some buggy, maybe, okay, this can happen, badly written code, this can happen in a rolling release, but on all distros. But even on the unstable, you can just roll back your system and you are good to go. I will make another video in the future in which I've been talking about, how my setup is, how to optimize NixOS for music production, for extra performance, etc. What tools, dependencies you need, how to install things, etc. And for example, also in this music production tutorial, I will also talk about manual partitioning, because in this showcase I've skipped over that, just by the defaults. I've used the defaults here because again, I want to keep things in this video rather simple. Close it. So, what is the first thing to do? You go to the NixOS website, obviously. There's some information here, decorative builds and deployments. You can watch some tutorials here and there, but again, reproducibility. So basically that means, as you have seen earlier, I will show you later on, that the configuration file can be copied on other NixOS computers, and basically every package you have installed, all swappiness settings are just one NixOS rebuild switch away from being applied on the other computer. Then you have declarative. Again, here you're not telling the terminal to sudo dnf install, but you declare what is to be running on your system by this Nix configuration file. Basically, you do not say do an action, but you instead say this action is being active. and reliability. There are some things I need to explain later on. And here you have the Nix packages. The Nix packages is basically the AUR, or just the basic repository of NixOS. What I can say is that NixOS, the amount of packages available on NixOS, on Nix packages, far supersedes any other Linux distro, even the AUR of Arch Linux. But again, that's a different topic. What we're going to do now is go to press to download. Now, here you have download Nix the package manager. Careful, this is not NixOS, like this here. This here can be installed on all Linux distros, Fedora, Debian, whatever. Now, what I wanna say, that I have zero experience working with the Nix package manager on non-NixOS system build-ups. Basically, if you wanna try it out, maybe just look for some tutorials. I cannot really talk about that. I have zero experience with that one. But what I have experience with is NixOS, the Linux distribution. And you just got a graphical ISO image. And then what you just need to do is to download it and then create a boot device. You know, just use Impression, for example, or Fedora Media Writer. There's that one here. I mean, there are as many USB booting programs as there are stars in the sky. But just check the USB stick, the ISO file, and apply it. I mean, it's best straightforward here. So here we are in the installation screen, and here you have, for example, NixOS installer GNOME. So basically, during the installation phase, you utilize the GNOME desktop, and here you can utilize the Plasma desktop. Again, this only applies during the installation phase. You can choose whatever desktop environment you want to have later on. And here you have the long-term support kernel and just the default kernel. In that showcase, I'm just gonna utilize the default kernel. You do whatever. Now for the installation phase, I'm gonna use the GNOME desktop, but later on I will choose the KDE desktop. And just let it do its thing. So welcome to NixOS installer. In my case, I utilize the German language. Use whatever language you need. Then press to continue. Make sure the time zone is correct, continue. Keyboard settings are correct, continue. And here you have, what username do you want to have? In my case, I'm just going to call myself Steve. And here you have, the same for logging in. Then my password. Now, here you can see the password. You have an error message. The password is shorter than 6 symbols. And yeah. Here I have used the same password for administrator. Usually I use a different one, but I will skip over it, but come back to the previous one. Now, for example, you just utilize it for your basic home usage. You're the single user and you don't really care about a really long password. Just disable, uncheck this mark here, and then you're good to go. Or you can just use a longer password, whatever you want. So here you can choose the which kind of desktop I want to utilize. I mean, you can install obviously them later on if you would want to, but I'm just gonna work with the Plasma desktop. Now here is an important step, because are you wanting to work with DaVinci Resolve or NVIDIA GPU drivers, or I think even Steam for gaming, you need to enable this mark. Otherwise, you will not be able to install such packages. You can obviously enable this later on, but to have an easier setup from the get-go, I would enable this. Then press continue. Then usually I do my own manual partitioning, but in this short tutorial I will just skip over it and just delete the drive. You can choose if you want to utilize swap with or without hibernation. Basically what that usually means, that on your host system, if you use swap with hibernation, the amount of swap is at least the amount of RAM. If you use without hibernation, it's just whatever value. Again, if you do some manual partitioning, you can specify that. But in this short tutorial, I want to have it very simplified. I'm just gonna run with the defaults here. Then press continue, make sure everything here is correct. And then voila. Then usually in the first percent it runs rather quick, but if the installation process hits 46%, then it will take a bit longer. Don't worry, it's not frozen, it just takes some time. So now the installation was successful, and now we're just going to do some rebooting. Here's NixOS, NixOS configuration. Let's just boot into that one. This is the password. The first thing I do is just switch to the dark mode, because that one is at least bearable. System settings. What I'm going to use. Here we are on the starting screen of NixOS. Now, what you might be noticing that if you go to the search bar and type in Discover, the App Store is not available now, because how you install packages is completely different. Now, what I would recommend you to do is just go search bar and type in terminal and add it to the lower bar here. So and then we just open the terminal, and now, for example, usually on other distros we go sudo apt install, as I've shown earlier. Now obviously if you want to run the htop command or btop or fast fetch, obviously they are not installed. So how do I do this? Because basically when you are working with NixOS and you want to install packages, you're working from two sources, let's just say. The primary source being NixOS wiki, and then the second source is being Nix packages. I will show you later on how exactly I mean this. But now to give an oversimplified instruction, because I have already some experience with it, what I'm just going to do is type in sudo nano etc NixOS configuration, because inside the etc NixOS is the configuration file. Everything in this configuration file defines what's running on the system, the packages which are installed on the system, what kind of kernel is currently being used, what kind of bootloader you are working with. So everything is centralized in this configuration.nix file. And then press enter. Oh yeah, nano is the text editor, basically, inside the terminal. Now, here you have basically some explanation and some pre-configured setups made for you. So, here you have the config packages, imports, yeah, what I also need to show, because here you have cd etc NixOS, and then type in ls. LSD. So ls. Here you have also the hardware configuration.nix file. And if you, let's just open it. Sudo nano hardware configuration.nix file, password. And here you have, do not modify this file. It was generated by nix generate config during the installation process. And here are some, basically it tells you do not make any changes on it. Stay away from it, basically. So we're just going to leave that one. But now you know that what this imports command does is basically inside the hardware configuration.nix, the second text file inside this folder, is being imported and being read by this configuration.nix file. Now here you have to find the bootloader. Here you have the kernel we are currently using. So basically you can change the text file, save it, rebuild your system and reboot, and then you can change the kernel. So it's actually rather easy. Now here you have the network manager for internet access, the time zone, all the different settings. Then here you have services, X server, enable, and here you have the KDE Plasma desktop. For example, if you want to install the GNOME desktop or Hyperland, you don't need to go to the terminal and run for installation script, for example, or just sudo dnf install Hyperland. You can just services, it's explained later on, just add the corresponding text inside this configuration.nix file and save it and recompile your system. That's the entire principle of NixOS. Now we're just gonna, for example, work with the pipe wire, the audio setup. And I will make a different video in which I talk about optimizing your NixOS PC for music production, but this is not important right now. Here you have users, and my username. In my case, it's Steve. And here you have extra groups. Because, for example, if I can add myself to the audio group, the video group, because usually on Arch Linux, for example, you type in sudo user mod -ag audio Steve, for example. In NixOS, you do this inside, again, this configuration Nix file, like everything else. You just type in audio. So now, right now, nothing has been applied. We're just gonna save it from now. And here you have packages, KDE packages. I will skip over it for now. Now here you have install Firefox. Basically, as long as this command line is enabled here, the Firefox browser is available. And here you have environment, system packages with packages. And what I'm going to do now, I'm gonna enter, then press htop, btop, fast fetch, for example. Save it. Now we have made changes to the configuration.nix file and we have saved the changes. But we yet need to do to recompile our system. And that's actually really easy. Clear it up. Sudo NixOS rebuild. Now if I want to apply the changes in the configuration.nix file, I type in switch. If I want to have enabled them during the reboot phase, I type in boot. But in my case, I'm just gonna run with switch. Build in Nix, building a system configuration. So now we have recompiled our system. And just type in fast fetch. Now it is available. And now htop, for example. Now again, I'm working inside a virtual machine. So if you're wondering, here you have, my RAM, my memory, my swap, and my different CPU cores available for this virtual machine. Now, let's just say you want to install Steam, for example, or Flatpaks, what I'm going to do now. Because not everything can be installed inside environment system packages. Because you can, first of all, also add them here. User packages. Difference is that if you add them to this section here, it is only available for the specific user. If you add them here, these are available on a system level. again, since I'm the only user of this computer, I just throw everything down here. But now I'm gonna open the Firefox browser. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna show you two things. First of all, NixOS wiki. Yeah. And then secondly, Nix packages. So for example, now I'm currently inside NixOS wiki. And for example, you want to install Flatpaks. Flatpak is a Linux application, sandboxing, distribution framework. Okay, some explanation here. But now using this configuration, Flatpak will be installed and ready for globally for all users. Basically, services flatpak.enable equals true. Now, you do not need to understand the Nix language. All you need to do is copy it, go to the terminal, and copy it anywhere you want to. In my case, I'm just go services. So now I'm gonna make a slash to make a comment. Flatpaks. So written correctly, that usually helps. And then just copy paste this line in here. So what we need to do, save the changes. Then again, rebuild your system. So after you have done rebuild, the tutorial will also explain to you, you need to add the Flatpak repository. Then we are going to do this. Now, in order for these changes, specifically for Flatpaks, you need to reboot your system first, just that you know it. Yeah. Here. So again, now we have enabled Flatpaks. Now, for example, we want to install the Discover. You know, the app store for this KDE Plasma. Just type in Discover. And here you can see the Discover package is not properly explained in the NixOS wiki. What does that mean? That you now go to Nix packages, go to make sure that you're working on the correct channel. Now, what channel are you utilizing? This is readable here. We are working on 25.05. Which means we should work not with the unstable or not the older stable version, but the 25.05 channel. Because NixOS runs at stable releases and also the unstable release, aka rolling release, like Arch Linux. And now what I'm just gonna do is type in this. Discover. Now, which one are we choosing? KDE packages.discover. So you just click on it, and here it will show to you how you can install it. Now you can install them via a Nix shell. Now we are not going to do this, okay? We are not going to work with Nix shell or Nix environment. We are only going to work with NixOS configuration. So we're just going to click on it, and it will show you environment system packages, and we just need to copy paste that one here in, copy, then go back to the configuration.nix file, environment system packages, save it, and then again rebuild your system. then for example, I want to work with DistroBox. DistroBox, now it shows me virtualization, Pacman, enable, Docker Combat. Now you do not need to know what all the different lines mean. All you need to do is just copy paste it in. Now it helps if you understand it, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So now for example, right on top of programs, Firefox.enable. Pacman, and then we copy this here in. So we have just added this file here. Then it explains to us environment system packages, because usually you could just also copy paste it in here, but environment system packages is already written here. So copy pasting this entire line here makes no sense, but only this one here. Here. So just copy paste it in here. Because again, here you have environment system packages with packages. And here you have that one. The same thing. Again, same principle, save it, and then recompile your entire system. And now you can clear the terminal and just type in Pacman -- version, and also DistroBox -- version. So what we need to do, just reboot our entire system. Back on track. So now, earlier we have installed the Discover App Store, because what may make your life a bit easier here is that now when we open the Discover App Store, since we have also installed Flatpaks and enabled them, we go to Tools here, Work Office. Here you can now install the Flatpaks from this year, but only the Flatpaks, not the native programs. And that is the oversimplified principle of how NixOS works. I mean, NixOS, you know, you can add multiple external files, mount drives, SSDs, HDDs into it. I will not bombard you with the different information right now, but just that you have seen how NixOS basically runs. Let's close it. On my host system, that you have a better overview, for example, I have sudo nano etc NixOS configuration. For example, if I go, for example, here on my host system, I have systemd as the bootloader, not grub as inside my virtual machine, but that's unimportant right now. For example, ZRAM. How much percent of your RAM is going to be used as ZRAM? That's unimportant. For example, the type of kernel I'm utilizing. It's also visible when I type fast fetch. Linux Zen kernel. And here, I've just made changes to the command line. Voila, it's running. You know, the Flatpaks, the Plasma desktop, ClamAV and malware scanner. It's unimportant right now. And here you can see, for example, in environment system packages, I have already installed lots of things here. Also, for example, for music production, lots of things. I will explain them in a future video. Again, you do not need to understand NixOS right now or be able to work with it. I just want to first of all tell you that NixOS exists, and in my opinion, NixOS is way easier to work with than with all other distros. It might not be the easiest to learn, maybe, but in a day-to-day use case, I think NixOS is the most comfortable of all Linux distros. For example, now when you first created your NixOS system, you only have the hardware configuration.nix file, because these here I've created myself and also imported them here. Basically, etc NixOS, again in the same folder where configuration and hardware configuration.nix files are, I've added my own files. Again, I will explain it in a future video. I only want to tell you that it is possible to, because what you're gonna do is sudo nano game.nix. Game.nix, again in my configuration.nix, I've added it here, and in here I've installed my NVIDIA GPU drivers. Then, for example, you know what kind of driver, open source or the proprietary one. Here I've installed Steam, for example. The same goes with sudo nano etc NixOS mounts, for example. That is for my external SSDs, HDDs. Again, I will explain it in a future video. I only want to show it to you that it is possible and how it roughly works. I will, again, in the future videos, I will explain it in more step-by-step detail. Again, mounts.nix has also been added to the imports of configuration.nix, because in the end, configuration.nix is the file that counts. And what you can also see is that, yeah, we go here, and then we go to etc NixOS, and again, this configuration.nix file we are currently editing. Also the game.nix file, all of them have been linked into here. Now, what you can also do, for example, is make a copy of all of them, with the exception of the hardware configuration.nix file. But other than that, you can copy all of them, for example, copy them on a USB stick. And if you have a second PC, also with NixOS running, copy them in, and then overwrite it, with the exception of hardware configuration.nix, and then just run sudo NixOS rebuild switch. So basically, all changes you have made on one system can be applied on another. And that's really important. For example, first of all, you have bricked your system. You do not need to reinstall every package. So, for example, your system broke down and you need to reboot your system and you need to reinstall everything. In NixOS, with the Nix configuration file, you can just copy it in here in the folder, scan it, and then it will have configured everything for you. But you can also, for example, in the work environment, just one user makes the changes and copies to all the other users. So that's really how NixOS on a use case functions. And again, I use it for music production, for gaming, for basic work stuff. It works flawlessly without any issues. Because, again, what I also need to mention is, for example, are you, for example, unsure if a certain program is, for example, interacting with another one? Or, for example, you have, I don't know, installed add-ons for a certain program, or, for example, in regards of malware. For example, you have your system running and the malware is trying to make changes to your system. In order for this malware to make changes on your system on a permanent basis, it needs to edit the configuration.nix file. If it's not doing that, it's not going to make changes that really are relevant, or even at all. Unless, especially if you're done running sudo NixOS rebuild, where everything is being rescanned and everything not into the configuration.nix file is being removed. And that's really what the fundamental basics are of NixOS. Again, this was an oversimplified showcase. It was not a tutorial basically, but just a rough introduction in how NixOS functions, how it works, and that it even exists. Yeah. And again, on that basis, NixOS fundamentally runs different than Fedora and Arch Linux and all the other distros that are derivative of Debian, Arch, and Fedora. So again, unlike with distros like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, that just make slight alterations to the package versions or some pre-configurations, NixOS functions fundamentally different than any Linux distro you possibly have ever worked with. And again, the configuration.nix file, it works flawlessly. And it can be optimized for gaming, server running, video production, whatever you would want to. Again, now that I topic at video production. I will explain it in the future, but you may have seen my video in which I've talked about installing DaVinci Resolve on Linux. And I've made use of DistroBox containers. I mean, here you can also do that without any issues, but inside NixOS, we go to Nix packages, to the channel I'm currently using, and just type in DaVinci Resolve, configuration.nix, and you can just copy it in here. And I've done just that. Sudo nano etc NixOS configuration. No. Oh, I'm inside the Arch Linux container. Of course it doesn't work. Sudo nano etc NixOS configuration.nix. And the only thing I've needed to do where is it? Here it is. It works from the get-go. It is in the repositories. You just need to add this line to environment system packages or to user packages if you would want to. And then it works from the get-go. I've never had any problems with DaVinci Resolve in NixOS. So again, when I've said that NixOS may not be a beginner distro, but for example, installing packages is the easiest of all Linux distros, and I mean this unironically. For example, working with different groups, user groups. Here you can see to which group you have added yourself. So everything is neat, tightly packaged inside the configuration.nix file and not spread out around your system. And this is what makes NixOS so great for me personally. Again, I've switched to NixOS and I've never ever looked back for any reason. But yeah, I understand it's not for a complete noob, let's just say it does not look the most inviting, but after one day of getting to learn it and some fiddling around, it gets better and easier to work with. I mean, there are some quirks like any other distro has, but what I can say is it's my favorite distro unironically. So I use NixOS, by the way. Yeah, what distro are you utilizing? How happy are you with it? And yeah, throw it down in the comment section and yeah, keep working because there's still much to do and go read Berserk.